guys, today we're going to be talking about solving one-step equations. Before we get started, there's one thing that we should know, and that is what is an inverse operation. So the word inverse means opposite. So an inverse operation are two operations that undo each other. So thinking about an operation and its inverse, there are a couple that we know. If you have the operation for addition, opposite of addition is subtraction. Similarly, the opposite of subtraction is addition, right? And then we have multiplication. Opposite of multiplication is division, and the opposite of division is multiplication. There's one more that you should know. The inverse of multiplying by a fraction is multiplying by the reciprocal of that fraction. So we're going to get this on the next section, but this is something that you should know as well, okay? So first off, we need steps for solving an equation, and these are just basic steps for all of the equations that we're going to be handling. First step is to simplify both sides. So we've been doing that in the first two sections of this unit. Simplifying both sides means just distributing and then combining like terms. Then you have to get the variables to one side of the equation. So they might be on both sides of the equation, but you have to move it to one side. We're going to be focusing on this third step and fourth step for now. Later on, we'll be using steps 1 and step 2 over and over and over again. So step 3 is to isolate the variable using inverse opposites, right? Order of operations, and then the fourth step is to check your solution. So inverse order of operations means backwards PEMDAS, right? So looking at a problem, right here we have x minus 5 equals 3. What you have to ask yourself is, what is happening to x and what is the opposite of that, right? So looking here, what's happening to x right here? X is being subtracted by 5, right? What's the opposite of subtracting 5? Adding 5. So we have to add 5 to both sides of this equation. So whatever you do to one side of the equation, so if it helps you, just do a dotted line. Whatever you do to one side of the equation, you have to do to the other as well, right? So if you're doing something new into one side of the equation, you have to do that same thing to the other side. So from here, you're going to see that negative 5 plus 5, those two cancel each other out, right? That equals 0. You don't have to write x plus 0. You could just write x, okay? And then you have to add on the right-hand side. 5 plus 3 is 8, okay? And then that's your solution. Remember, step 4 in the previous steps, so right here, is to check your solution. So check your solution by plugging this number back into the original equation. So we're going to write 8 minus 5 equals 3. And yes, 8 minus 5 does equal 3. So we're good. All right. Looking at B. Just going to move this over here. What's happening to x, or what's happening to the variable in general? Z is being divided by 3. What's the opposite of dividing by 3? Multiplying by 3. So you have to multiply both sides by 3. This is going to be in the way. So multiply by 3 to both sides. Notice 3 divided by 3, or 3 over 1 times z over 3, the 3's are going to cancel each other out, and you're just left with z over 1, or basically just z, which is what we want. 3 times 4 is 12, right? So that is our solution. Check our solution by plugging it back into the equation. So 4 equals 12 divided by 3, and you know that 12 divided by 3 does equal 4, so we're good. Next. What's happening to the variable? Y is being multiplied by 3. What's the opposite of multiplying by 3? Dividing by 3, right? So divide both sides by 3. 3 divided by 3 cancel each other out, and you're left with just y. 28 divided by 3 is 9 with a remainder of 1, so it's going to be 9 1/3. Check this by plugging it back in. So 3 times 9 1/3 should equal 28. 9 1/3, I'm going to rewrite that as an improper fraction. 9 times 3 is 27, plus 1 is 28, so that 3 times 28 over 3 is equal to 28, and the 3's cancel out, so 28 equals 28, and you're good. Okay? The last one we have is 4 is being added to j. What is the opposite of adding 4? That's subtracting 4, right? So subtract 4 to both sides, and you're left with -6 is equal to j. Plug it back in for the check. -2 equals 4 plus -6. Oops. 4 plus -6 is -2. And you're good. Okay. The next set of examples are still one-step equations, but this time we're going to be dealing with a lot of negative numbers. So it's going to be the same thing. You're going to have to figure out what's the opposite of your operations. But you also have to be cognizant or aware of all of these negative signs and deal with those as well. The goal is always to get the variable by itself. So you have to get rid of everything, even the negative signs that are attached to it. So looking at this first one, we have -2 being multiplied by x. The opposite of multiplying, by -2 is dividing by -2, right? So divide both sides, not just by 2, but by -2. So the negative divided by negative turn into a positive. 2 divided by 2 turn into 1. So you're just left with 1x or just x. And then again, negative divided by negative is positive. 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. Okay, and that is our solution. Check by plugging it back in. So -2 times 2.5 is equal to -5. 2.5, I'm going to rewrite that as 5 over 2. So -2 times 5 over 2 is equal to -5. The 2 and the 2's cancel each other out. You're left with -1 times 5, which is equal to -5. So I'm just going to write that as being good because I don't have a lot of space left. Next, we have in part B, z is being divided by 5, and it's also being multiplied by -1. We could get rid of both the negative sign and the division in one step. So essentially, if you see a variable on top of a fraction, this is just replace the variable with the 1 on top. Leave the negative sign out here. This is the same exact thing. Z is being multiplied by -1 over 5. Okay, so remember in the steps before when we were talking about inverse operations, the inverse of a fraction is the reciprocal of that fraction. So the reciprocal of -1 over 5 is 5 over 1. So reciprocal just means upside down fraction, or that's how I like to think of it as. So multiply both sides by -5 over 1. Okay. 5 divided by 5 cancel each other out. Negative divided by negative cancel each other out. So you're just left with z by itself, which is what we want. -5 times 10 is -50, and that is our solution. Check it. I'm going to give myself some more space. Or not. So we're going to plug in -50. -1/5 times 50 is equal to 10. 50 divided by 5 is 10, right? -1 times 10, oh, that was a -50, okay. -1 times -10 is equal to 10, so we're good, okay? Next, right here we have y being added by a -3. The opposite of adding -3, so let me just write this. Adding -3 is subtracting -3, right? So well, subtracting a negative is the same thing as just adding a positive, right? So we're essentially going to add 3 to both sides. So +3 to both sides. If you're ever questioning whether or not you did the right operation, you always think of your goal. Your goal is to get y by itself, or the variable by itself. So as long as everything you're doing cancels out on the one side with the variable in it, you're doing the right thing. So here we have 3 minus 3. Those are opposites. 3 minus 3 cancel out, so you're left with 0 there and just the variable. Negative 5 plus 3 is negative 2, and that is our solution. Plug this back into the original, so negative 3 minus plus negative 2 is equal to negative 5, and that does work out. Negative 5 is negative 5. And then the last one, negative j equals 2. Again, you need to get rid of that negative sign. So it is being multiplied. It's being multiplied by a negative 1. You got to get rid of the multiplication of negative 1. There's two ways of doing it. You can either multiply both sides by a negative 1, because our goal is to cancel out all these negatives. So even though it's not the opposite operation, it still does what we need to. We just need to get rid of the negative sign. Or you could divide both sides by negative 1. Whatever you decide to do, just make sure that the variable puts by itself. So j, that's a weird j. J is equal to negative 2. Okay? Plug it back in. Negative 2 equals 2. The negatives cancel each other out. And you're good. All right? That's it. Bye.